Personally, I think some of the biggest risks have to do with China's slowing growth and challenges in its property sector. Inflation's coming down in the United States. The higher interest rates, we haven't really seen the effects of those yet, and those could have a significant crimp on growth. It's hard to identify just one risk. I would say there's three or four. But I'll try to be relatively brief on those three or four. As you all know, probably the IMF revised its growth forecast down from 3.5 to 3%, and with a lot of downside risks identified. Personally, I think some of the biggest risks have to do with China's slowing growth and challenges in its property sector. More importantly, also its effort to rebalance growth away from investment-led and export-led growth towards stronger household consumption share of growth. I think that's not an easy transition, and one that so far Chinese policymakers have not really embraced. I think there's a lot of potential downsides in the US right now. Growth has been pretty strong. There's been a lot of fiscal stimulus, and much of that stimulus remains in households' pockets, although it is starting to run down. There are challenges, political challenges around the budget. Inflation's coming down in the United States. I think the higher interest rates, we haven't really seen the effects of those yet, and those could have a significant crimp on growth. And then, of course, we have the industrial policies where you're shifting resources around in the US, and it's uncertain as to whether or not those industrial policies are actually going to stimulate growth or create inefficiencies in the US economy. In Europe, we see a very difficult transition in the energy sector. We see higher inflation in Europe, higher interest rates coming in Europe, and so I think there's a lot of downside risk in Europe. On the plus side, we have relatively strong growth in India, Indonesia, Malaysia. Some of those advanced developing countries are performing very strongly and helping to lift global growth. Another downside, of course, is the debt challenges in the LDCs. As global interest rates have risen, their debt challenges have become bigger, and they need a lot of capital to help with the green transition. Some bigger issues, I think, beyond 2024, I'll be brief about this, and that is, a lot of the US policies have been aimed at reducing its trade deficit with China. I don't see that coming out so much in the Biden administration as the Trump administration, but it certainly influences the political debate in the US and helps reinforce this argument going on about geoeconomic security. And work that I've done on global value chains show, and colleagues that I've worked with, show that there's been this incredible diversification of supply on the supply side of GVCs, but not much of a diversification on the demand side of GVCs. So we see changes in the supply in terms of delivering products. Many foreign countries have engaged, many developing countries have engaged in that. But on the demand side, it's still very US-centric. And so this is why that rebalancing in China towards household consumption, I think, is pretty important. And I think it's pretty important for countries like South Korea. If China starts driving its growth more through household consumption, that provides more opportunity for Chinese exports. Well, in terms of opportunities, I think, I think one has to pay attention to regions of the world that might benefit the most from this geopolitical uncertainty. And, when I was at the WTO as chief economist, India was very opposed to global value chains. By the time I left the WTO, India was very interested in learning more about global value chains. And why was that? Well, because of the geopolitical tensions between the US and China, and India saw an opportunity. So countries see opportunities as well as businesses. So I would look towards, places where you see potentially good things happening. I say potentially, it's hard to know for sure. I look at Africa and the objectives around the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. That's a region of the world that's been under-integrated regionally and globally, and there's great opportunity there. Mercosur, which has been an underperforming regional trade agreement where a number of those countries are looking for opportunities to truly integrate. And then with the green transition, there's a lot of discussion about how do we diversify our sources of critical minerals? How do we build processing capacity for critical minerals? And if there is going to be this geopolitical fragmentation, I think it's going to occur on a more regional or friend sphere relationship than what we've seen through the 1980s and 1990s in this burst of globalization.